I welcome the opportunity to share this material here. And when we actually talk about resilience and we take a look at the science of resilience, it's actually so much more. And that's actually what we're going to be talking about today, going beyond resilience. It's not just how do you deal with difficult things, but you have to understand resilience is the natural condition for each one of us. We took one study followed POWs 10 years after their release. And what they found was 18% were experiencing this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder. Have you heard of that before? Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? 18%. Yet 61% of that same population said that they were better because of the experience. They said that experience made them a better husband, made them a better leader, and made them better in their community, and made them better in their work. Actually, they didn't want to sign up for it again, right? But they actually grew because of it. And here's the crazy thing. The research shows that post-traumatic growth is the more likely outcome for the human condition than distress is when we're faced with trauma. We see the same thing when we study disasters, natural disasters that happen in communities. Communities overwhelmingly actually grow and get stronger after the difficulty and the challenge. However, what we've been studying is distress. And because we've studied distress, we write about distress. Because we talk about distress and we write about distress, we study it, we look at it, and then we try to promote what keeps us from being distressed, which means not being challenged. Now, imagine yourself, you're the coach of an NCAA football team and you just won the college national championship. However, you're a quarterback. So you come back, now you need to plan for the next year. And your quarterback has graduated, you got one of two choices to start this team. You got a lot of talent coming back, not the quarterback. You've got a young fourth-year junior, he's an experienced backup quarterback, respected by the team, but he's got average arm strength, limited mobility. You've got this other young man coming in, he's a freshman, high school national records, in the area of baseball includes home runs, runs batted in, grand slams. He throws a 93-mile-an-hour fastball. And he was selected to the USAA Today First Team All-American Football. Okay, so he is a significant powerhouse in football, and he has national records in the area of baseball. So you're the coach. Think about who are you going to start? Who are you going to have lead your team the next 2 years? All right. Think about it. Think about why, and share it with the person next to you. All right. Love the discussion. Everybody has lots of opinions. By show of hands, how many of you would choose the youth? Yeah, the youth. Young Drew. Okay. How many of you would choose Drew? All right. Pretty good number. How many of you would choose Tommy? All right. I got some coaches out there that isn't going to choose anybody. I hate to say this, but as a coach, that's not an option. All right? Well, fortunately, and here's actually a quote, maybe some of you couldn't read it at the bottom. Without question, Drew is the most talented quarterback I've ever been around. This from Coach Lloyd Carr. And fortunately, or unfortunately, Lloyd Carr was in this situation after Michigan won the national championship in '95, or were co-champions with another team people here are more fond of. So they were co-champions. You've got a young quarterback coming back. He identified him as the most talented. Now, very rarely in have natural opportunities to kind of measure things in nature, right? Where you have a situation happening and you kind of measure, because you got these two individuals have the same college pedigree, background, coaching through this process. And the situation, the quarterbacks we're looking at is Tom Brady and Drew Henson. The choice Lloyd Carr made is play both. Well, the first year, Tom Brady did start as quarterback. The minute he faltered, he was thrown to the bench. I think the Syracuse game was like the third or fourth game of the season. Thrown to the bench, they brought in Drew Henson. And then the following year, as a redshirt senior, Tom Brady split quarters with Drew Henson. One would play the first quarter, the other one would play the second quarter, and who started the second half was who had the best quarter of play. And he did this for the first 5 games of that season. Right? How many of you, by the way, are familiar with Tom Brady today? All right. But You have to understand, Tom Brady wasn't even considered the front runner to quarterback his team his senior year. And yet now some of you can argue, if you're fans, that he is the best quarterback who's ever played in the NFL. So how did we have somebody who's a skinny, slow fourth-year junior that actually gets benched in favor of a freshman go on to become one of the best quarterbacks the NFL has ever seen, and yet Drew Henson didn't? Well, we're going to talk about that because it has a lot more to do with the mindset than it does the physical set. We're going to discuss two theories of mindset and how the mindset influences achievement, why it drives our behavior, and how you can develop a mindset. Now, I've just got about 45, 50 minutes with you all today to share some of these principles. This is part of a larger program. It takes about 4 to 6 hours to get more information. We even have, as far as parents, pay particular attention because this is incredibly valuable. For supervisors, how can we get the most out of ourselves and others? Well, it starts with the mindset. Dr. Robert Brooks said mindsets are basically our assumptions and expectations. What are your assumptions and expectations about yourself and about others? Because these assumptions and expectations actually harden into attitudes and determine and drive our behaviors, whether we're even aware of them or not. So often our assumptions happen like that. It just happens in an instant. We make a decision, our mind processes a lot of information, and then we base how we feel and what we do on a situational event, not realizing that our feelings and actions are actually tied to a thought, our mindset, or our attitude. All right, so I want you to again to think about a time in which you felt particularly smart, competent, or accomplished. And what were some of the circumstances around that experience that you had? All right. Now, researchers have been studying over the last 30 years, well, they've been studying for a long time, but over the last 30 years in particular about this thing called mindset. And what they find is when people discuss a time in which they feel smart, is we find ourselves tend to lean in one of two categories. Either mindset A, it's when a person doesn't make any mistakes, when they pull things off really, really well, right? Sometimes we might think of that from day to day in our work and our job. That's when I feel accomplished, when I have a day and I've knocked everything out, haven't made any mistakes. Or when you finish first, or you win, or it's perfect. You know, you finish first and it's perfect. Or when something that comes easy for me, but other people really struggle at it. That's when I feel particularly talented. Mindset B is when it's really hard, and I try hard, and then I can do something I previously couldn't. Or when I work on something for a long period of time, and then I finally get it figured out. I get that aha moment. Now, most of you can probably identify with both mindset A and mindset B, and that's because they tend to be domain specific. Some people might have mindset A with math and science or with education, whereas B in athletics. And here's what the research shows. If you're of mindset A, usually it's fixed. Now, Carol Dweck now calls it a fixed or growth mindset in her work. It used to be, when she was first studying it in the 80s, called an implicit personal theory. Right? Mindset's a lot easier. All right? And it sticks. So it's basically, when we're of a fixed mindset, we believe that our personal attributes, such as our abilities, including intelligence, or even our personality, it doesn't change much over time. It basically has a set point. You can work real hard, but you pretty much have to be gifted and talented with a certain amount of with ability. So, and you're only going to get so good. So, and it really doesn't change much over time. IQ is one of those things that actually research shows an IQ, intelligence quotient, you either have it or you don't. You can't appreciably increase your IQ over time. You can increase maybe scores on a test, but your IQ doesn't actually change. Growth, when we're of a growth mindset, then we assume that people can change and develop their abilities, even who they are as a person. You know, intelligence and personality over time can be developed, and particularly when focused effort is applied. Now, it's important to note that our mindsets, we can be of a fixed mindset in one domain. Again, it might be like math, but in a growth mindset when it comes to reading comprehension, right? So our mindset will vary a little bit depending upon the domain. It's not globalized throughout the whole person. But what's interesting is we find many people moving more and more into, with knowledge, we can actually change the mindsets. The fixed mindset, you might hear people with the theory, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? That kind of thing. And people can become very successful in both mindsets. But the success is driven in different ways for different reasons. And we see this with Tom Brady and Drew Henson, as well as other figures. So for Drew Henson, he was a phenomenally gifted athlete. As Lloyd Carr said, the most gifted quarterback he had ever seen. And in fact, he was so gifted that he was brought back to the NFL after he left and spent some time playing Major League Baseball for the Yankees. And then he came back and played quarterback for some time with the Dallas Cowboys. And then again for the Detroit Lions. But he never quite saw the kind of success that Tom Brady did, who is physically less gifted than he was, who he split time with in college, who is 3 years older. Why? Well, because for Tom Brady, it was about becoming competent. And when you read back, I had it cited, the Sports Illustrated vault in the first one. You can take a look, you can look back, you will see that the players, without question, identified Drew Henson as the better physical quarterback. Some would say he was the better quarterback because they were assigning physical ability. But others said Tom Brady knew the game better. Nobody was a better student of the game. And you'll hear this about some athletes, right? What's it take? How do you maintain the desire to be a good student of the game? Well, it comes from the growth mindset. Because the fixed mindset says, I just need to physically get better myself. So, will I grow? Did I learn? That's what he was constantly. What can I do with what I have, with the tools that I have to make myself, to make my team better? Every failure was an opportunity to say, okay, well, this didn't work out. What can we do different? How can we learn and how can we grow? And you'll see that with Drew Henson, physically gifted, continued to work on his physical gifts, kind of plateaued. The other interesting thing was the year after, when Drew Henson was solo as the quarterback, his junior year, they had 3 losses. They had a very good season, had 3 losses. Going into his senior year, instead of playing and working that summer to become a better quarterback and take his team to new heights, he left. He didn't finish his senior year. He went to play baseball. Why is the growth mindset so important? Well, it's because what we're finding out now with the brain science. And interestingly enough, a lot of this performance psychology and a lot of the brain science we're finding out, actually we've stumbled upon, not in studying performance, but in studying a disease. Studying Alzheimer's disease. Because what's happened is the brain actually develops and responds with experience. Learning new thoughts, learning new things creates a myelination of the neurological pathway here. Now, what this does is it increases the speed at which information travels. But you only myelinate when you're actually really in deep practice, when you're really focusing on something, really attending to something, and paying attention to the small mistakes and the small corrections that you're going to make. And what happens is it starts to stimulate your brain, and your brain then starts to myelinate those connections. So then it's not like you create new connections. We've known that. But what this tells us is that the connections we do have, you can actually increase the speed to learn what we would call learn new things. You're not learning new things. Actually, what you're doing is you're increasing the speed and you're getting faster, you're getting more knowledgeable. So that pathway, it's like the difference between a walk and a 300-mile-an-hour drive, right? A car traveling at 300 miles an hour versus me walking a certain path. That's how fast the signals go. Whenever you're first learning something new, you're firing these neurons. And because the pathway is like a little dirt path, many times we will assume, well, I just don't have the ability. I just don't have the talent because I haven't tried it before. I haven't done it before. So there isn't any kind of pathway that's been developed. It hasn't been myelinated, right? The signal hasn't been allowed to go quickly through the pathway. So we will step back. We will stop. What research shows is even up into our 60s and 80s, we can learn new things by increasing the myelination in these pathways. This is an interesting study. Anybody know this group of individuals? What's that? Beatles. Good thing. And what are they known for? Baseball. All right, the wrong team. All right, anybody else? Right? Music, yeah, right? Phenomenal. The British invasion. They started the British invasion at 1819. They were coming in the U.S. and they were changing music. Phenomenal. They were seen as musical geniuses, right? Now, you know how they became so great? It's because they were so crappy. Right? Research now will argue, if you follow Malcolm Gladwell, the reason they were so good at 18 was basically they started pretty early. John Lennon, Paul McCartney were friends, and they were playing in a band, in a garage, just playing their instruments together at 12. And then as they got a little older, they started getting a band together. But they weren't that good. They weren't good enough to play gigs locally in Liverpool. They weren't good enough to play the pubs. But they were good enough to play a few sets. And so they got a manager that actually sent them to Germany. But anyway, what happened was they started playing in Hamburg, Germany. And they would play 7 days a week, 8-hour days. John Lennon said, we played so much, we had to learn different ways to play the instruments. And if you're playing a typical set in a pub, you're playing maybe 3 hours, and you could probably get away with playing the same song twice. How about getting comfortable playing the same song 30 times a day? All right? That would get old, right? And then you're also playing to an audience that English isn't their primary language. You're playing for these long days, right? And at the time, they were just 16, 17 years of age. Right? It'd be child labor laws now would restrict that. But at the time, they didn't question it. And they had 270 appearances over the course of these 2 years. What Malcolm Gladwell estimates at over 1,200 hours of live performances. When you study professional musicians, many professional musicians with a 30-year career don't have 1,200 hours of live exposure to an audience, live performances. Over and over and over again, they had to be in an uncomfortable situation, learning, learning on the fly in a very tested, uncomfortable environment. Over and over and over again, they felt like failures and losers because not everybody liked their music. And they had to take that criticism every day. Every day. That's tough. You think that's tough for for 17 and 18-year-olds? Right? Well, in today's society, we would. I think it's a bunch of crap because 17 and 18-year-olds can take it better than adults because they don't know any different. They didn't know any different. They just kept playing. They just took it. And they couldn't whine and complain and quit. They were stuck in Hamburg, Germany. They had to get up the next morning and go play again, right? And hoped it worked out. That's why they're as good as they are. The other interesting thing is Ringo Starr was actually a late addition. Who knows who the first drummer was? Pete Best. That's right. Pete Best also went on to has since been, he was a great studio musician. You actually have heard some of Pete Best's material and don't even know it. But when he was in Germany, he fell in love and stayed in Germany when the guys came back. They picked up Ringo Starr just before they went big. So, when talking about a mindset, we want to move to this growth mindset. We have to understand targeted, mistake-focused practice is effective. The problem is that we've created a society in which mistakes are something we want to completely avoid. Failure is something we see as fatal. And if you're of the fixed mindset, if you fail, that means you're a failure. You can't have that. You can't afford to look silly or stupid in front of other people. You just can't have it. You don't ask the question that you really need to know information on because you don't want to look stupid. But you have to, because this is where growth occurs. The best way to build a good circuit is to fire it, and fire it again. Attend to mistakes, then fire it again, over and over again. What the science shows us with the myelination of the neurons is this. Struggle is not an option, folks. It is a biological requirement. Being uncomfortable is a biological requirement to growing, increasing the myelination in our brain. To getting better, you have to be uncomfortable. Just doing it and practicing for many hours doesn't get you better. All right, they did a study on chess players. The number of hours didn't correlate to their performance. Those people that were the best performers actually performed and made the most mistakes because their practice, while maybe not as long or as much, was the most intensive. They also spent more time watching other experts and watching and being intent in dissecting their performance as well, not just their own. In fact, in some cases, some of the best chess players played half as much as other really good chess players. But it's how they played. We see the same thing with figure skaters. They don't practice jumps. The best figure skaters don't practice their whole routine. They just focus on the parts and the jumps that they don't master, that they don't have mastered yet. Yet really good figure skaters will do their whole performance. Spelling bee champions, we see the same thing happening over and over and over again. Time involved in something does not mean you're going to be successful. What kind of time are you investing? The other one is why are passion and persistent keys ingredients of talent? Because when wrapping myelin around a big circuit, it requires an immense amount of energy. And it's uncomfortable. And it's not a lot of fun sometimes. And so if you don't love it, you're never going to work hard enough to be great at it. If you don't love it, you don't enjoy it, you don't see some payoff, you don't like learning or growing or seeing small successes, all you're looking for is that one big win, let's hit the lottery, it's not going to happen. You're going to drop off. You're going to quit. And so that's why it's so important. Now, I'm going to share with you 4 keys to developing a growth mindset. There's a large number of them, and I go into more detail in other trainings. But you have to understand, just knowing this material is not enough. Just knowing things, having knowledge, having taken a class, having gotten a certificate is not enough. For one reason is because of this misunderstanding we've got. Finish this for me if you've heard it before. Knowledge is power. So some of you have heard that, huh? Some of you getting applications to colleges trying to get you to come and take some additional classes and stuff. Yeah, I got 2 boys in college. I've got 2 more in high school. Universities are sending me information all the time, and they keep trying to promote that. But I'm going to tell you, that's a bunch of crap. Knowledge is not power. Knowledge is simply information you possess. You have. You might be familiar with something, but that doesn't mean you've got any power. The only time our knowledge moves into power is when it becomes applied. When you apply the knowledge that you currently have, you test it and you find out. You push it to the point of failure, and then you say, where does my knowledge end? Where does my ability end? And then take a step back, and how can I get a little bit further? We live in a very prosperous nation, folks, in a very prosperous time. And unfortunately, we don't struggle enough. As I mentioned before, growth is the most likely outcome when human beings are exposed to a traumatic experience or event. When we take a look at individuals who grow and get better because of challenges, we overwhelmingly see a way of seeing the world, a mindset or an attitude, a certain ethic of sorts of how they approach stuff. Now, I've been exposed to this for a long time. I've been a student of this for a decade now. My poor boys have been my experiment in this. They've been my little guinea pigs in this whole experiment. And so I've had to artificially create more difficulties for them. Of course, in a loving environment. Don't want Child Protective Services called on me. Right? There's no kennels involved or locked closets. Right? But actually encourage them to be overwhelmed. To take on so much in middle school and high school that they just can't take it anymore. And then they go again. Embrace what's uncomfortable. For me, my slogan with them is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I've strongly encouraged endurance sports, cross country, swimming, right? Other things that you don't think you can do anymore, but your coach says you got to do another lap. You got to do 1 more mile. You got to do another split. And then you do it. Many of us have had that experience when we went through basic. There were times when we thought, man, if I could quit this, I'd quit. But you weren't allowed to, or something said, I'm going to make this happen. Whatever it was your motivator that made you keep going when you felt like you wanted to quit, apply that same principle in other areas of our lives. For some reason, we will apply that principle and we will get through basic and we will never use that and tap that resource again. And that's unfortunate. We won't tap it again. You've got it. It's there. It's within each one of us. When you feel uncomfortable, or when you have some knowledge, you use what you've got and you test it to the edge of your ability. When you fail, you take a step back and then do an assessment. What can I do a little bit better? That's what the individuals are out there doing it with a growth mindset. Those with a fixed mindset are afraid and uncomfortable because if I fail, then I'm a loser, or I failed, some people are going to tease me, mock me. You know who's doing the teasing and the mocking? Other fixed mindset folks. Because if you do well, it's threatening to me. In those areas in which we're in a fixed mindset, we're uncomfortable with other people doing well. And then what we do is we make the excuse for why they do well because of natural talent. Right? That's the fixed mindset. When you get uncomfortable, when it feels difficult, down here with the bottom one, know that you're growing. When it feels difficult, know that the myelination is going into the circuit, and go back and give it another shot and do it again. Now, of course, your greatest likelihood for success and performance, and we go into this in with another series, is in your area of strengths. But this becomes a problem because if you were already gifted or talented for something, you become, quite honestly, a high likely candidate for plateauing. Because what happens is we get into what Erickson and Josh Foer in his book, Walking or Moonwalking with Einstein, talks about the okay plateau. Sometimes our natural talent and ability will get to a certain point where we can continue to coast and be successful, or at least not be bad. Do you realize each one of you could increase your reading or increase your comprehension in 1 hour of studying by as much as anywhere from 200 to 300% with just one technique? How many of you would like to know what that is? All right, for the 12 of you that would like to know, I'm going to share it with you. You want to do it repeatedly in intense bursts, because otherwise you're going to reach a plateau. Many athletes, especially, we're going to reach a plateau in which we reach the edge of our ability right now. Right? Athletes, it's easy to understand because we got a physical plateaus. But then they have you mix it up. They have you cross-train. They have you do something a little bit different. Well, we do the same thing with our mind, with our relationships, folks, all the time. If you're in a fight and you have an argument with your spouse, don't just throw up and say, hey, this just isn't working out. Say, why isn't it? Why is it that everything I've done so far still isn't working out? And, oh, when our relationship is good, what is it that is working? The growth mindset, you can apply this in all sorts of different areas. For those of you that are parents, all right, you want to start to instill this mindset in your kids? Set your watch or timer, 18 minutes, 16, 18 minutes. Have them sit down and read something. You read something. And then at the end of that 18 minutes, hit the timer and then have them tell you what they just read. And you share with them what it is that you're working on. This was something that just happened by happenstance as I was studying. That was something that I shared with my oldest son, or my bonus son, who's my stepson, Michael, as I was up working on some doctoral work until about midnight, and he was also up taking he was doing something with his, it was one of his AP courses, right, because he got college credit for the class, right? And my brain was fried, and I asked him what he was studying. And he was telling me what he was studying. And then as he was telling me, he was correcting himself. And then he goes, you know, Dale, I'm glad you asked me because I wouldn't have realized I was off track if we didn't start talking about it. That when you have a growth mindset and you're working on the edge of your ability, you're going to come up with all these aha moments to improve yourself and people you care about around you. By the way, that bonus son we had used some of the techniques, the visualization technique. See, hear, feel yourself doing the new behavior over and over and over again. Albert Einstein said, imagination is everything. It's the view of the coming attractions. When he died, and there's an article back there that talks about, one of the things when they did an autopsy of his brain was the large amounts of white matter that he had that was grossly more than the average human, right? The average cadaver that they were cutting up, his white matter. Well, the white matter is myelin. And the myelination, this process, folks, in brain study has only been occurring over the last 7 years because of the science and the technology to measure it hadn't really been available before then. And when I say that we've been following on it, it's because the lack of myelination or the breakdown of the myelination with things like multiple sclerosis is the breakdown of the myelination to certain firings that even somebody who might be an expert concert cellist, within a year, can't play the instrument at all. Why? It's because of the breakdown of the myelin. They didn't lose any neurons. The brain was all still intact. What broke down was the myelin. Again, this research and these instruments are just coming to be. So you're not going to find a lot of it in popular books for a while. It's still hidden in obscure journal articles. See, hear, feel yourself doing the new behavior. Visualize it over and over and over again. Visual practice of something can actually improve our physical performance. First exposure, experience of that, 72 Olympics, the Soviet Union, won medals and awards and events we didn't even know they had contestants in. I mean, it was crazy how they dominated in 72. And the assumption, they were cheating, right? Drug test them all. Well, it was actually the first time that the visualization or the practice or using this mind to improve performance was really used in a disciplined way. And it was really the visualization. Now it's a commonplace. I mean, the Red Bull sports teams, they've got multiple individuals that are going through. When I say multiple, they've got multiple experts on their teams, walking folks through the visualization of their event, of their performance over and over and over. It's dangerous to do that stuff. You know, to practice, if you were to practice some of those leaps and stunts, all sorts of errors could happen. So what do? They practice. They'll launch themselves into foam pits, and in their mind's eye will visualize practice over and over and over and over again. How do we know? And we know it works. Well, their evidence, but also you can take a group of 12-year-olds, improve their free throw shooting by 20%. 20%, just having them sit on the bench, visualizing their free throws, perfect free throws for an extra 10 minutes, and improve their free throw shooting by 20% over the lucky kids that got to go home. The interesting thing is we do this visualization thing all the time ourselves. But rarely do we do it in a way that helps our performance. Typically, we'll run through our mind some Hallmark movie or version of our life that looks like a Hallmark movie. Or I'll retell a story of how this happened and these new policies, I tell you what frustrates the heck out of me. And I'll tell these stories of injustice. And every time you retell that story, you relive that event as though it is real. Don't let your mind sabotage you. See, hear, feel yourself doing and accomplishing the things you want to accomplish. See yourself failing. One technique I used with my boys was each night we'd read what was called Big Daddy T.W. Smiley story. All right? I was a featured character, Big Daddy. All right? But actually what I did was I followed the principles of a technique that I used to help a young 6-year-old deal with the sexual assault of an uncle. Therapeutic story process. So do it repeatedly in intense bursts. See, hear, feel. When it feels difficult, know that you're growing. Okay? So as parents, we can take this, we can take this and improve the lives of our kids, for ourselves, in our workplace. We can take this and improve the quality of our lives. What we bring and the value that we bring will increasingly grow. All right? We're not topped out now. In fact, we're just beginning. You now have information that less than 1% of the population is aware of. And when it gets difficult, you understand why, which most people will assume, because if they're operating out of a fixed mindset, and particularly, it only gets, I don't get any better than this. So we're going to wrap up here as we've got the tale of the two mindsets. That's the mindset, the way of looking at the world, his attitude, his belief, his impression, and of what he thought of himself and his own ability is what allowed Tom Brady to go from an ordinary Big Ten quarterback with average arm strength, limited mobility, this skinny, slow fourth-year junior who was put to the bench in a Syracuse game in favor of a true freshman, has since gone on to be recognized as the Kansas City Star, Randy Korvitz, called a 4-time Super Bowl champion, a 3-time Super Bowl MVP, 2-time NFL MVP. Actually, no quarterback has been better than Tom Brady during the last 15 years. If perhaps ever in the NFL. But he is a dang good quarterback and a good compilation. So that's the growth mindset. And that's one way in which we can start to develop what I refer to as a growth ethic. Start looking at opportunities. How am I growing today? How am I growing in my relationship? How am I growing in my performance at work? How am I growing as a father, as a mother, as a husband? How are we growing? Okay. Now, don't, by the way, use this as an example, gentlemen. If you blow Valentine's Day, you can say, hey, sorry, I worked at the edge of my ability today. I'm sorry, I bombed it. I'll learn from it. I'll do better tomorrow. I've got this new growth mindset thing going. All right. You still have 2 days. You got some time. All right. I really appreciate your time and your attention. There is an article available for you. I sent it to the shirt that also talks that will address some of this information. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.